in beautiful downtown Orleans in the Nauset Meeting Room of Town Hall. It's just a little after 12:07. Apologize for getting late. Log in, dial in, information is on our agenda. I'll call the meeting to order as Vice Chair, and we are going to have two items on our agenda. One is a fiscal year 26 budget workshop. Kim Newman, our town manager, is here. Mark Reel, assistant town manager, and then there's also a review of financial policies, and we adjourn. Jen Mintz? Jen's here too. Hi, Jen.
I am here, yes.
Yes, thank you, Jen. Yes.
So what I want to do is potentially take them out of order so that we can talk about the policies first, because there are some changes there that are tied to revenue changes that are in the budget, and that'll give Molly time to print the budget so you can, when we start talking about expenditures in more detail. I'm just gonna, Mark, can you just send it to her, make sure she's printing them? Sometimes it logs in here. So we met a couple weeks ago, and Lynn is here. She can also come up since she's been working with me on this. So we have some key policies that are related to the budget, and we're gonna start with the easiest one to talk about first, which is ambulance receipts, okay? So, the chief and I met this morning, and we had met a couple weeks ago, and then Jen and I had also met before and talked about it, and then we met this past week too to talk about the policy. And the policy will be a little bit secondary, but I'm gonna just give you in concept what we're talking about. So up on the screen, you can see the ambulance reserve. And so let's talk about this. So right now, your current policy says that you basically will strive to, have enough in the account in order to replace an ambulance on a regular schedule, and that you'll use $600,000 of that per year to offset the costs related to the operations of the ambulance, and that can be through staffing or all of that. So we started working about what is the actual replacement schedule for the ambulances in real time, what is actually in the bank, so to speak, and where would that get us in terms of revenue if there was some support there to help offset the costs of the override related to fire rescue? That's what we've been trying to sort of pin down. So what you can see here is what we're going to propose in document form, which is that the policy change to say, and I'll show you the language changes later, but I'm sure the math is really what you want to see, which is that we are going to strive to maintain in the account an amount as determined by the chief for the replacement of one ambulance, okay? Now, we expect that cost to be anywhere around $500,000 over a certain amount of time, right? This is an 8-year replacement schedule, which is not dictated in the policy. That's a practice. That's what he wants. And it also adds an additional ambulance in FY31 with the understanding that hopefully there is a bay to put it in, right? So this schedule going forward has been generated by the chief and I, even as soon as this morning, in terms of what number we were comfortable with, sort of going forward, right? So when we're going to vote on a policy change, you're going to get a real document, but the real changes are this number here, which is the amount determined to be used in any given year, that's beyond what he deems to be needed for the replacement of one ambulance. So you can see, we had already talked about going from 600 to 800 in earlier versions of the budget. Once we did this exercise out and estimated all of these ambulances up to 500 for the E's, some were at 472, some were at 480. These revenues are very low. It's 1% over time, and then goes to 1.5% once the new ambulance comes online. Very conservative, which is actually true, right? Growth doesn't happen that much with the ambulance. This is what that looks like in real time. So what it does for the length of this next potential contract that we're working on, right, with fire rescue for the next 3 years is it provides additional funding to help offset the cost of that in real time. Right, and still maintain the existing, plan and replace the existing ambulances and plan for the addition in FY31, and then basically leaves in the future, and we'll come back obviously with policy in future years, basically to determine an amount that we're comfortable with, again, each year, beyond the minimum that he deems is necessary for one ambulance. Are there any questions about this?
Questions?
What, yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
So the in the FY '25 projected, there's the 600,000, which is the ambulance replacement number, right?
Nope, so the
Operating-
600,000 is what in this year, we have no replacement in 25 right now.
Okay.
One's being built.
So the next one that's scheduled to be basically approved for purchase is in the 26 budget, it's in the CIP this year. 600,000 is the amount that you have been allocating the last 5 years or so from this fund to support your operating budget. What I am saying, and the chief are saying, is their department has grown, therefore their contribution can also grow from this fund to support that. And in order to make sure that we are properly planning for the future, we have done a projection out, so you can see what that schedule would look like. And then where we felt comfortable in terms of how much do we really want to make sure we have right in there at all time. So what it's done here is, the previous versions of the budget, right, so let's say for FY '26, so that's in anticipation of how much revenue we think we're gonna bring in, which is about 950,000. And then there'll be about $2 million in the bank, essentially unspent at the end of FY '25. Next year, so that starts you off with about $3 million in that account. So then we're gonna take 950 to help offset the costs related directly to the operation of the ambulance in the operating budget, and through the CIP, fund the replacement of 173. And that will leave you with, at the end of the year, in projection, assuming, about 1.5. And then in '27, we've moved up. The next one, 174, would schedule to be replaced, and then there's a gap year, because one was replaced in '23, and then '29, and then '31. And then repeated.
Just a note for minutes, Mark is here. Mr. Chair, meeting is now yours. We're just starting questions. Mev had one question, I think, other board members, and then Tony Pearl's got his hand up, so.
Thank you, Kevin.
So just a quick catch-up, we've been working, staff and I have been working on a review of the ambulance reserve policy to see if there was any potential in there to long-term plan about using additional revenue that's generated in that account to offset increasing department costs, and to make sure that we are adequately planning for the replacement in real time of ambulances, knowing the lag time to get them.
Yeah,
Am I
Mark. Who am I asking for permission to ask?
Yeah.
Kim, just for kind of an overall, from a public point of view, currently, how many ambulances are we operating?
We have 3 now.
And when so we're anticipating replacement of each of the current 3 plus an additional.
Yes, so they're on an 8-year schedule.
And is that realistic?
It's realistic as long as we are anticipating including a 4th ambulance in that slot, which is what the chief and I talked about this morning, which is if we weren't planning on adding an additional ambulance to the fleet, then it wouldn't be, and we'd have to cut the years down. But because we have the funding potentially available and hopefully the space by FY '31, then the 8-year replacement is realistic.
And can you recap for us, we've heard it, once we order an ambulance, unlike a fire truck maybe, what is the time it takes from ordering to delivery?
18 to 24 months.
So in terms of our schedule, you were just talking about gap years. We don't anticipate, otherwise we're every year, every 3 years or whatever. This rotation assumes new ambulances purchased. While we have 3, the rotation is this many years, and while we have 4, it's this many years.
Correct, and they are scheduled, well, they're all scheduled to basically be replaced in the next couple of years. The real question, like, to get down to like the bottom, is what is the reserve for, right? And if we're planning correctly, which we'd like to do going forward, is the idea that something might happen in real time related to one ambulance, and how would we in real time then fund that ambulance. And that's why we came to making sure there's enough in reserve at any time, any given time, for the replacement of at least one, never below that number. So that way, if something were to occur, we know where the funding source is for this. I mean, we'd have to go to a meeting to move it, but you know what I mean. Like, that's the idea, which is, there really isn't much of a reason to have more than that unless we were gonna start increasing the schedule or lag time again. And the idea is, we would review it every year, and then he and I together, right, can decide an amount that we're comfortable recommending to be used, and then he can make sure, and it's based on a replacement cost that he is comfortable with.
One more quick follow-up. We have a policy that also says a certain kind of vehicle must be looked at and purchased first. This, right now, the technology is not there for these ambulances to be green, is that correct?
Right, and we actually just, the last town meeting, upgraded the technology in these ambulances,
Right.
yes.
So we're just covering the whole deck.
You're looking at potentially an electric ambulance.
Recharging, hey, there,
but I
some
don't
emergency
think- I don't think
vehicles have
those are
gone that
online
way.
yet.
Yeah.
I think we're stuck with diesel probably. Michael?
So if the fund is to cover the immediate use or immediate need of one ambulance, what does one ambulance cost?
About $500,000.
And is that with the trade-in? I mean, are we accounting for that?
Well,
Because even at 8 years, somebody does buy these.
So, well, that's why we actually changed the numbers to 500. They used to be 460 something or 480. I mean, all of it is a general projection. It's about what the cost is, and so it's just was easier for us to assume 500, right? And for all of those factors, which is, we really don't know. right?
Okay, so I just-
You really, but you can't guarantee that it's only 425 or
No,
465. and so
I just, the question's gonna come up, are we accounting for
And that would be
trade-in
great
value of
it's-
our ambulance? And I just wanna make sure you, as you said, you've considered that and taking it into account.
It's also important to note that the revenue that's created from the ambulance is very specifically designated for what it can be used for, right? This is not something that we could use to fund other areas of the budget. It has to be directly related to the operation of the ambulances. It can be used to offset the costs of the employees and the equipment related to them, but it can't be used for other parts of the budget, which is the other reason why we would leave so much in reserve too, which is, we can't overfund with this. Any more questions on the ambulance reserve?
Tony Pearl have a question online? Muted, Tony.
Yes, it's a comment that came out when the chief was in front of the finance committee, and I think it's important, and you guys should know it. The number of manufacturers of ambulances and fire equipment has been reduced from over a dozen to about 5 now. That was in the Wall Street Journal, and that's going to make the chief's job and looking at the timing and the amount of money very difficult. And so I just think that everybody ought to be aware of what's going on and that the market is not the way we think of a market condition.
Yeah, thank you. I was gonna mention that. I know that manufacturing of equipment, fire equipment, ambulances and trucks has been limited to a number of companies now. It's a reduction. You can anticipate a longer time for delivery and probably more cost. So I think it'd probably be good to have a conversation with the chief about ordering them.
We did.
Yeah.
We had that conversation this morning, which is, a scheduled year has to take into account the lag time related to the replacement, which is, again, if something were to occur and then that lag time becomes longer, that was part of the conversation of like, what is the number that's comfortable if we had to buy another one that's not a scheduled replacement, right? Because it takes too long, which is a reality, right?
Can we put in an order anticipating, say, a 2-year delivery time? And they call us up and say, hey, we got you in, we got you done, it's only been 18 months, your ambulance is ready.
If you approve the funding and sign the contract, right? That's the other part.
We could cover ourselves.
You have to order, right, you're contractually obligated at that point. You have to approve the funding and then you would sign it and then, right?
But to your point, Ms. Chair, this schedule, including the projection you did, shows we could do that. I mean, it gives us the more assurance of delivery and maybe, with all the volatility, some cost control.
Right. The real variable is about the space.
Right.
And that's the real issue, which is they could certainly operate an additional ambulance. They don't have that space to store the additional ambulance. And so that's really the question, which is if the rescue station passes, the soonest that we would think that we could fund it and put in another ambulance right now is 2031.
Yep.
Right? And that should give people an idea of how long it takes to build these projects. We're going to talk about that. So this is one of them that we're working on. We're going to get language in front of you that basically memorializes this, and then that's what you would adopt for this year, and then we'll bring it back every year in this. But since this is really the meat of it, I figured you'd want to see.
Kim, did you want Molly to print the policies?
I think she should print the budgets so they can have the hard document. The policies we'll send, and then we can add to tomorrow. Since I don't think we want to edit in real time, right? We want to get to the budget, right?
Mr. Chair, just one quick one. So if you're getting a nod from us on this, that means you've already incorporated the drawer of the 950?
That's correct. That's
Perfect.
what we were doing this morning, which
Excellent.
is we have, so, you know, we are really working to be as accurate as possible for tomorrow, right? I can't stress that. We are trying to get, so I'll show you how we've adjusted that when we get over there. The other one I want to talk about, just generally, we've been working on, is about the general reserve policy. It's one that we've talked about a couple of times. We will walk through that one. It's not substantially changed. What do you think? Today, tomorrow?
Well, I think we talked today.
Today, okay.
Yeah.
I'll bring it up.
I'm here. I'll give you support. Sorry.
We really tried to do on that one is incorporate the changes that we had talked about in the percentages, making the target 12%, continuing to have the 3 to 5%, saying that dictating in language that anything over that 12% would be used towards capital items and what capital items are. So, again, we're just real-time editing. I don't know that I have them electronically updated from yesterday. Yes? An email?
Well, I sent it to you at 6 o'clock.
So then, yes. Okay. And I was thinking we could give these in hard copy, you could read them, so you don't have to do it in real time, and then,
So you want me to talk through it?
yeah, you can certainly start while I pull it up so they can see it.
So one of the things that, in working on it, we're doing some research. We looked at what other people were doing. We also looked carefully at what the S&P said, what the report said, to see what they said about what their expectation was. And there's the copy of it online. So you might remember, if you have these engraved somewhere, that the way that policy had first been set up was to give a little bit of a lecture on the reserve policy. And when Kim and I and Mark were working on this yesterday, we said, we don't really need that full page of
This-
run-up
This whole
explaining.
front page is basically explaining what a policy is about reserve policy. It's not the policy, it's the definition of what a policy is.
So that's why it said overview at the very
Right.
top.
So we
Took that out.
recommending elimination of that.
You want to pick it up?
Sure. So then, here's some key changes that we made. They're not significant changes. They're ones that we've talked about before. So the general operating reserve is actually the stabilization balance and the free cash combined together. So we talked before about free cash always wanting to be between 3 and 5%, right? We are aiming to generate between 3 and 5% every year, right? Not set aside, aiming to generate. And stabilization between 12 and 14. So if you take 12% plus 3 to 5%, you get 15 to 17%. Right now, we have 19%, right, in our latest report. So we are well within these guidelines. So the recommended change here is 15 to 17. It was 13 to 17. So this is actually more conservative this number. Further down, you can see why we maintain these policies. It's important to identify what the value is. We sort of cleaned up the language here, right, helping to maintain, right, because we have an excellent credit worthiness right now. So then how it gets passed, which is another one, right, where the money comes from. This is all pretty standard, right? This is just general ideas. And then the idea of what those things are, right, that it gets spent on, non-reoccurring expenditures of unanticipated capital improvements, capital equipment requirements, right? These are examples, right? So anything that is allowed by law, essentially, that could be used for, that's the definition here. And then the change here is what we just talked about, which used to be 12 to 14%. We're recommending changing it to 12%, and then essentially anything beyond 12% that we start thinking of only using for capital expenditures that are up here, which is what we've been talking about over the course of this year. In terms of this budget and this town meeting, we don't have anything right now at this moment scheduled to come from stabilization at all. We still only have free cash being utilized. So this policy, when adopted, really would affect the town meeting. We have a little time on this one. There's nothing directly financial, except the use of free cash sort of in our CIP. And so that's why this one also needs to be updated.
So in the red, the paragraph that's all in red, it gives the examples. Some of that is basically chapter and verse right out of Mass General Law or the DLS guidance as to specifically what this could be used for. So by including that phraseology in the policy, it just reminds people, the next generation of select board members, if you will, as to what it could be used for and justifies. In the research and looking to see what our neighbors were doing, Chatham, Brewster, Eastham, Provincetown, and so on, some of them specifically do quote some of those uses. And so Chatham, for example, gives those specific examples, some of them. Brewster, again, they say mitigate emergencies, those types of things. So some of them are already using those sorts of language in their policy akin to ours.
Matt, you had a question?
Yeah, I just want to get into the relationship between the general stabilization fund and free cash, because you're combining them together to come up with your percentage.
Right. Well, technically,
But are they, in fact, and operationally kept distinct?
yes.
And the next page of the policy is the free cash policy.
So, but they are, when they are recognized, right, as our unreserved, undesignated, right, fund balance, they get combined automatically when someone is valuing our credit worthiness. So if you read the S&P report, it'll show you that we maintain a 15 to 19%. That's what they're talking about, which is essentially stabilization and free cash, right? And this policy, you know, dictates sort of our guidelines on both, right? And so, but they do, when people ask all the time, why is that number so large? That's why, which is like, it's stabilization plus free cash. But when you vote them, they are separate sources to use them.
Right.
Okay. Anything else on this one?
Next, there's
Free
the,
cash.
we left the free cash alone.
We didn't touch
There's
about this.
clarity specifically about free cash as the second page, if you will, to the policy.
And Ed's got a question.
Go ahead, Ed. Can you use the microphone, Ed, just so it gets recorded, please? Thank you.
Ed Mahoney, 3 Anson Hunter Lane. Does the stabilization in the 12 to 14%, that's has cash in excess of 12% presently?
Yes.
Is it a one-time usage to put it into capital? And said another way, will that cash stabilization fund ever exceed 12%? Will we ever put money into it when it's at 12?
So what you have been doing traditionally is transferring a certain amount of money every year in there, let's say an extra $450,000 to hit that super, really high target. you should either create a capital expenditure account in which the additional funds beyond 12% automatically each year, instead of adding to that, we move them into that account so that it's designated, right? Or, and the other part we should say is, interest grows on the money in the account. So we will go over 12, right? So it really is about determining the bottom, the minimum. The 12 is the minimum. So anything over that is available for use, one-time use.
If our ongoing target is 12%, and the stabilization fund is at 12% plus accrued and earned interest, we won't make a contribution to the stabilization fund.
Correct.
So free cash would grow by that, by any amount.
Correct.
So this might be a one-time usage of the excess stabilization fund to fund capital projects. Ongoing, it will be limited to accrued and earned income, interest
yes.
income going forward, because free cash will be the buffer.
Exactly.
Except that, as Kim suggests, there could be the creation of a capital
Correct,
stabilization
but that's
fund
a,
instead.
that's a Plan B or step two.
Well, but it's more of a step 2 than a Plan B.
Right.
Well, let's talk about that, actually, because that's part of our conversation. So we can show what that looks like in real time, right? Which is, the balance, you use the general operating budget, we talked about this yesterday, minus the debt payments, the town's general operating budget, so 12% of that, right? That's what we use. So we have previous years, FY '25 operating budget, 41 million. You have a target of 12%, so if we use 12%, so that means you need 4.936, right? You've got 6.6 in stabilization now. You've got about 1.7 over that target. The only way you can expend this money is at a town meeting with a vote. In other communities, typically what happens here is this money would go into a capital equipment account, which is something you don't have right now. So we're going to talk about that when we talk about building and facilities. The recommendation, now you can spend this money at a town meeting, but it should be designated into these accounts and specified. It's for controls, right? Leaving it here is also an option, right? Because you can't get to it in any other way. So like if we haven't made a motion on the town meeting floor to move this money, it stays there. No one has access to it. It's there in perpetuity. It's not something we can use during the year. It's a bank account that only has access twice a year, essentially,
At town
for us
meeting.
to use.
You have
right?
to
It's
vote it out.
The town's savings account, right? So it's not part of our operating budget really, right? It's this other fund that we have. And so, yes, we should do something with the excess.
I think the positive to these changes to this policy is we're eliminating ambiguity and subjectivity by saying our target is not a range anymore. Our target is a target.
Right.
We're going to achieve the target and maintain the target. Free cash is going to be the difference maker, and it will fluctuate based on our net revenues from a particular year. And from that, you can make a capital expenditure department or an account from that. I think this is great to clarify something that was ambiguous and vague.
And just to note, though, the budget grows every year, too, as we know. So that means the target will increase every year, too. And there might still be a transfer related to the target, right? That's a fact. But it will be less than what you were transferring before, which was about $450,000 every year into an account that was already sort of in surplus.
Yeah, I'm just trying to keep track of free cash.
Yep.
That current stabilization figure up there does not include any free cash?
No.
Okay.
So back to free cash, even though, again, these are more town meeting conversations than budget conversations, you have, we're going to talk right now, we might as well, we're pivoting perfectly into it, about the capital, the CIP, because this is the larger conversation we want to have about how we fund things, one-time things. So you had $910,000 left after the May ATM in free cash. Right now, we have a couple of articles that we are known for proposed use of that funding, right? That will not leave you with a ton of funding. Which is actually kind of typical for a May town meeting because your free cash gets certified in the fall, right? So what will happen, and we're gonna talk about the capital, the CIP, some of your larger known purchases of one-time equipment will pivot to the fall rather than May, because that's when the funding becomes available, right? Like anticipated free cash. If you know that you're gonna have 3 to 5% of free cash every year, you know you're gonna have $1 million or so available, then you get to determine what your priorities are, right? You're setting them now, but you can fund twice in a year, right? So I'll show you what that looks like in real time. Let's go to the capital budget. I think we're good on this.
Okay,
We will
Tony
br-
has his
Oh,
paw up.
sorry. It's not my budget, not my meeting.
You muted, Tony.
So
Yeah,
we are gonna give
sorry.
you printed versions of these for tomorrow,
You
okay?
know,
So that we can.
We'll email it too.
It's about time I learned how to use this computer. Kim, I like the transparency of this and also the restrictions of this, but having seen budgets at universities, sometimes these account really hamper what can be done, and in effect, the money can't be used for what the university wants to use down a little bit down the road. Is there a way to word this fund into which the excess goes so that it creates a visible and flexible fund?
Kind of. What I would say is, the money still has to move at town meeting because town meeting is the authority. You could, for instance, and we've talked about this before, we've talked about year-round housing, we've talked about economic development, we've talked about capital equipment. You could make separate accounts for each of those things and then make regular transfers from stabilization when it's over 12% into those accounts, and then you can spend from those accounts. If there's special articles or if it's a capital equipment account, it still has to be approved at a town meeting. But if it's a special article, it could be spent during the year for use, right?
So what would be your recommendation? Because you don't want to get caught up in so much stuff that you can't do it as much as having it restricted in inappropriate ways. So I don't know. I would be looking for what you think ought to be done.
Well, can we circle back on this? You're right on my topic, which is about the CIP, which I want to talk about, and building and
Well, this is
facilities.
the first time I've ever been ahead of time, so that.
I doubt that. I seriously doubt. So I know they're all intermixed, and it's probably hard for people to follow who are not here with us every day, but bear with me for a moment, okay? In the past, you passed every year, you passed multiple stabilization accounts, okay? Here, vehicles and equipment, building and facilities, you have pavement, and you have drainage, right? These are all additional accounts that you passed that are paid for with raise and appropriate, meaning taxation, right? The goal, right, is, in theory, you create a stabilization account because you are putting money into it over time to pay for future known areas that you need to work on. The problem with that, as we identified at the last town meeting, is it didn't happen in vehicles and equipment, which is why we did a $2 million or $1 million article catching up on equipment. And it definitely has not happened in building and facilities maintenance, right? So we're gonna focus on these two. These two we're gonna leave alone this year. We're not even gonna get into this right now. The issue with these two accounts and their creation, even though they appear to provide the flexibility of avoiding to ask for individual articles on the floor or having to ask for the needs of the town, it's done the opposite, which is it's created this illusion that you're funding enough in these areas through this account, and somehow it's all being maintained. So I want to show you what we're proposing in real time this year, right? After thinking about this for a while. So I'm going to make this bigger, so don't worry. Okay, and this is different than in the versions that you all have because we've been working on it in real time. So let me give you an example of what I am talking about, all right? This top part of the budget, this building doesn't exist, let's say, didn't exist before. What you're used to approving is this section of the budget down here. That's a list of capital improvement projects. The problem with this list, and let me give you an example, is, for example, the COA needs a roof replacement. Following the previous practice, and Ron has been managing this well for a while, he knows that has to be replaced. The cost of the roof is $350. He's then split that cost up over 2 years, $175 in this fiscal year and $175 in the next fiscal year. The problem is you've just taken about $200,000 of the entire money that you have set aside for building and facilities for the town, and you've put it aside. You've left the remainder to handle the rest of your building projects in the town. So even though you feel like you're scheduling replacement of these known projects, the problem is you're basically budgeting for larger projects that are one-time projects that should actually be paid for in any of these other sources we were talking about just a few minutes ago, which is a roof replacement of $350,000 is clearly a one-time project that should be paid for out of either free cash, stabilization, or some CapEx account. It should not be paid for with raise and appropriate, and not over 2 years. That, it doesn't make sense. And because the money hasn't been building up in here, there is no balance in this account, you're basically just
Deferring work.
or not, it's basically they have been doing the best that they could do, moving money around, which is not the thing that we want, right? We want transparency, we love creativity, but we want accountability, right? And that's part of the issue, which is it's put them in a really difficult spot to really either advocate for projects that need to get done, ongoing maintenance, and basically made departments say, I gotta wait 3 years for my turn. That, we have to shift how we think about that. And so, we'll start here. So what I am recommending, back to what would we do with the money, we have to start looking at the project list, the things that Ron is aware of, that he knows that he needs with Rich, right? As one-time funding sources, so stabilization or free cash, okay? So for this year, and this is gonna be a little bit confusing for a minute, because we're putting our recommendation down here about how this stuff gets funded, so don't worry, we have that next. So what's also problematic about this particular stabilization account is what it's doing, which is a nightmare for Jen, is it approves the money, it's raise and appropriate, this is all taxation, it takes that money, it puts it into this stabilization account, and then Jen has to immediately move these amounts into individual lines related to these things. It moves it in and out, right? And if it doesn't get completely all spent on that one line, right? Or if it changes during the year, it's an accounting nightmare. So,
In separate coding lines.
right,
It's have to be created, maintained.
it's a nightmare. And so that's the internal struggles, right? Externally, right, we're talking about raise and appropriate for one-time things. You're artificially inflating the tax rate, right? Potentially for a roof, right, in 1 year. That's what we were trying to get away from. Okay, so then the question becomes, well, what does that mean about the 400,000 from stabilization that we've been raising, from raise and appropriate this whole time? Where's that money go, right? How can we be sure? Well, here it is. So we went back through. So right now, the policy in your operating budgets, in your departments has been, they have some money budgeted in their own individual department budget lines for basic repair and maintenance of their buildings, right? Anything beyond that basic repair and maintenance of their buildings was then a request that went into this building and facility stabilization account. What we're doing here, we were showing you here is, and we'll use the police station as an example, is in the police station budget, and you can see up here in real time, the operating maintenance budget line in their operating budget right now is $21,240. That is what the chief has requested for the police station. What he had also requested was $25,000, which he had in every line going forward, right, for ongoing project capital. It was a line, it was there every year in the budget. You combine those two numbers together, you get this number of $46,240. Great. The chief is also, fire chief has come in, they need more money for their existing building. This is what is currently in their operating budget line, right? OES, $30,000, we're familiar with this one. We've added some lines, right? We went back and went through individual budgets for either the town hall, right, or for across the street, right? How much is in these facility budgets, right? We've also supplemented in areas where there was not any dedicated funding before, right? That number, right, this is already in the DPW, that number is about $450,000, right? Does that sound like a familiar number? Right? This is raise and appropriate. This is already in their budgets, right? The question is, there's how much is in here that's not in individual department budgets that allows the flexibility for the additional project work? It's about $200,000. And that money now, this 203, we're recommending move to DPW capital outlay in the DPW budget, rather than the Building and Facilities Stabilization Fund. Because what that means is, they can still do the project work on any building and facility in the entire town, and if they don't use it in that year, it will roll to free cash, and if they need to keep it, they can encumber it if they have a contract.
One coding line in Munis?
In that way, all of that other stuff goes away. Right? So like the in, the out, the extra. Now, to Tony's point, and before that, we need to be building somewhere for future capital. So we need to recommend either a capital equipment account or some kind of permanent capital account that we're transferring into beyond stabilization so that it's dedicated money for that. You don't have to do it at this meeting, but we probably should, right? That's language that we could bring forward and talk about what you really want that to look like for this next budget cycle. But in terms of operating budget impact for today, this is why we were editing up till this morning, since Rich could go on vacation. This is how we've changed building and facilities for this year. There's no decrease in the amount. It's the same amount of money. It actually shows you now what's actually being budgeted in one spot in those operating lines, even though technically the CIP is not, but like you can get a sense of what you're spending, right? So when you say we're not spending enough on facility, our buildings, now you get a better sense of that. This is your ongoing stuff. And then this is your one-time project stuff. Now, if you have to pivot back, and I wouldn't recommend it, but if we did, we had to somehow go back and pay for some of this with raise and appropriate, which I hope is never the case, you could, right? But I wouldn't recommend that. So what does that look like in real time in your budget?
Ta-da. Nice.
Sorry, I know I'm always bringing a lot to these meetings. There's a lot to do related to the budgets beyond just what are we funding in the years, right? We want to get it right. Not that there is a right, but. So what does that look like over here? Well, you can see, which is you no longer need to have a special article to additionally raise and appropriate, which is still taxation, for building and facilities maintenance. It's now transferred over. Vehicles and equipment, we've left as is for now. In the future, this is another one that you should be picking off with one-time money, right? So, you know, sometimes you ask, like, well, what happens with the budget? Like, we're doing these overrides, where are the areas that we look at? Like, if we had additional, if we wanted to use stabilization to pay for equipment instead and basically pay for this, you could, right? Those are the ways that you get to use the money that you have to help offset the tax rate, right? So, all of that to say, that's the biggest change that's happened since the last time we met on the budget, but we do have a couple of other changes I want to talk about in real time. Yep, sorry.
Can
My
I just
meeting, yeah.
clarify one thing? The existing stabilization fund, if the end of the fiscal year comes and it's not fully expended, it stays in the stabilization fund and rolls into the next year.
In this, in building and facilities, right, but
But what I'm getting at is the way you've shifted it over to their operating budget, unspent money is returned to free cash.
right,
Yeah, but we don't,
not in
all the money,
stabilization.
year to year, we haven't put any money in and left it there. It's coming out.
Yeah,
So every time we go to town meeting, the vote is to put the money in and take it out. So there's never actually any money in the
we are,
stabilization
right,
account.
but we are also talking about, right, that's true, there is no money, there's no balance, right? But we knew that last year. You could use these accounts in the correct way. You don't have to fund these through taxation is the other. You could use this building and facilities maintenance stabilization as your build-up account as you want to, and be putting money, one-time money in there, like a capital account specifically
And
for
it does
that.
stay there.
Yes, and then it would stay. And that's an option, right? Because you still, any stabilization account, we have to get authorization to transfer out of anyway. So you could, rather than creating a new one, use them for those purposes. But I wouldn't do it with raise and appropriate unless forced.
It doesn't matter. You want that? Can we go back to the?
Go ahead, Michael.
Can we go back to the other screen of the CIP?
Sure.
Just on the repairs, will those now go into these budgets above? Because we're increasing the
They're already in their budgets.
then we have like COA parking lot.
So the C,
and-
so,
and we
so
have-
here,
we
let's
have
talk about that.
Parking lot repairs, we have municipal
Right.
irrigation repairs, you know.
So-
I would assume if we're constantly maintaining these things, we won't need to repair them.
So the COA, the articles for the COA that are still remaining, the parking lot repairs, the replacement equipment, which I would argue actually doesn't belong in this, and then the kitchen and meeting room HVAC. All of those three, and this is a reminder, capital projects over 25,000, we can't combine them, right, to be one article. So the recommendation here is to pay for the COAs 210 from free cash as an article. And then this town hall air handler, and it's a phone system, that 140, also with free cash. That's because they're one-time expenditures. This 25, which is honestly very small, is in the DPW capital outlay, because they're related very specifically to work that they're doing in those departments anyway. So those don't need, they really could be mixed into their budgets, so, but it's
Right, that's
funded
what
in
I'm
there
asking.
rather than an article. But the rest of it is funded through free cash as an article.
Okay.
So, so there'll be an article on the warrant for COA building repairs of 210 from free cash. There'll be one for town hall air handling system and phone system, a 140 free cash. The only time this gets tricky is if you don't have free cash, right? So that's the one thing you wanna, and we'll talk about that a little bit in terms of strategy right here, right? What we just talked about. Some of these things are May, right? Known things that we would fund in May if we have the funding available. Some of them can wait till the fall. Some of them might not happen at all if we don't have the funding available. That's sort of, so depending on the prioritization of the project or the item, right, based on conversations that we have with the department head or the status of a project, right, we determine when we think it's best, right, that's our recommendation, right, to bring a project forward. You certainly can say, nope, we definitely want to bring forward this thing now, and we want to fund it in a different way, right? That's the budget process, right? So we've gone through here and sort of tried to show what pays for what, so people get an idea. So like, so we've put free cash and stabilization here, not because I'm encouraging everybody to hurry up and take it, but like, to get an idea that really in the fall, when your free cash gets certified, or even now, you really have two places to go for a one-time item, a large, or the thing you haven't seen me recommend yet on any of these smaller items is borrowing, right? The only things I'm trying to borrow are large items that we can't pay for. Right now, we're in a position to do that. That could change, right? We'd review it when that happens, right? Like, there are pros and cons, that we can debate about things, but if there are smaller items, and I know we're saying small for 300,000, but that we could pay with one-time money that we have available, rather than borrow, we would, right? Or recommend that we would, and then you can say, nope, let's put them all together as $1 million borrow, and then we could do that too, right? There are different ways to fund different pieces. Not my
And does
opinion.
this, hang on just a second. Does this, put us in a position where we have to make sure that any fall town meeting that we have has to come after free cash is certified? Otherwise, if we're saying, oh, we're gonna do this in the fall and
Well,
then
and that's pretty
don't know the
standard.
number yet.
That's pretty standard.
Yeah.
Like, we had
We're
talked
locked
about
into that.
moving them up. We want to move it up as much as we possibly can, but well, actually, we want to move it, we want to move it into the sweet spot, which is to preferably not be doing a warrant in August, right after we just finished town meeting. So we want to move it out a little bit. And I know, I don't know who else might have been in that DLS seminar at MMA, but they begged us to diversify the weeks because 90% of municipalities are all in the week of Thanksgiving or the week after. But too bad, because honestly, that is the sweet spot, which is like, we need free cash to be certified, and we want to use it, right? The worst-case scenario in a fall town meeting, and we talked about this last year, is, okay, well, that means we'd have it for May, right? So like, if it was an equipment purchase and somehow we didn't get it in time, you could take it from stabilization, which would be the last case, and then you could replenish stabilization with the free cash when it gets certified, right? You could find other ways to sort that out.
So spend without getting it approved first?
No, you basically would authorize, if,
Come out of stabilization, not free cash.
right, in the worst-case scenario, where you didn't have free cash certified in time, for whatever reason, you could make the vote sort of contingent, which is you would vote on spending from stabilization, which is still a 2/3, 3/4 vote, 2/3 vote, and then, when your free cash gets certified, the next meeting, you would replenish stabilization back up to 12%, which is what you're gonna be doing anyway if you start to spend it, so that's the cycle.
I'm still, noodling with the free cash stabilization
Okay.
distinction. And you're labeling that free cash / stabilization, but it's really two distinct pots of money.
Right, it's, exactly, what I'm listing is possible funding sources, so that you know.
It'll be either
But
or.
all I'm saying is, to the reader,
You think it's one?
I think we should pick one where we think it's gonna come from, and not just sort of,
Well, we could put them all as, I added stabilization because I wanted to be clear, like, that it is a possibility.
You just say
You
reserves.
could make them all free cash, or you could say,
Reserves.
reserve would be.
General reserves.
right. So it's just that idea, which is, where does it come from? And it's not borrowing, right?
Kim, can I ask a question? I'm a little concerned when I see that the maintenance, the building kind of fund is only at 400,000, because what I'm not, we have a history in town, Ron's a miracle worker. We have a history of being reactive and then anticipating, oh yeah, we'll need new windows, we'll need a roof, but the breakdown of an AC system or air handling system, and I'm also trying to anticipate that when we have opportunity, the conversions that we might be expecting to adapt to energy standards have not been included in what we've asked our department heads to anticipate about their own facilities. So is that number, for the next fiscal year, yeah, I get it, but are we prepared to really accept what it costs to run our buildings the same way our homes and our cars have issues that can't be always anticipated, like that one tire goes and you end up buying more tires than you were ready to buy?
So, I mentioned this a couple of meetings back. You absolutely need to be funding this more.
Yes.
I think you should take some of that money that is in stabilization or in free cash and put it into some account of your choice, and have it available for these reasons. One of the things that's not on here is planned repairs for existing buildings, that we are also potentially planning to replace, but not for at least 7 years. And that's a much larger conversation, and that's sort of part of that's where we're going, which is, even if every capital project was approved in May, every one of them, you're still talking about maintaining existing buildings that we have for at least 5 to 7 years. And that seems to be where the ball sort of got dropped the last couple of years, which is, there's a cost involved in that. So I would definitely think about taking some money and putting it aside towards capital projects or facilities, or even a special article, free cash or a stabilization related to facility maintenance and upkeep. And then it's basically there until it's gone, right, for things that we need to maintain from now to then. But
Can I, Mark, is that all right? One of my concerns, and it may be like the disaster thinking of the time, is that we can't predict costs that we saw, like in COVID, construction costs going anywhere but up. And we don't know, is it gonna be a 30% increase? We have no clue what's gonna happen. And so, God forbid, we have to drain our stabilization fund. Like, how do we replenish it at the same time that we were then back to deferring the kinds of costs that we did defer when we had obligations to our employees? And you can't predict the future, but my question is, what are our safety valves in terms of being realistic about what we're providing for? And I'm just concerned that we've kind of, the emperor is partially naked, but he's not completely naked yet.
my recommendation is that you need to put more money aside for capital, right? That's what you need to do. You don't know what that is right now, or you don't, I mean, we haven't, we should do I don't even want to say the word study
Right.
right
that's
now,
what I'm-
between now and May. But we should really do a facility needs assessment based upon a real life expectancy of maintaining these buildings for at least 7 years, right? All of them. That's part of this, which is we don't know what gets replaced and when. And that's part, like, there's some of that is built in here. I had a sort of similar conversation about it last week at OES. One of the things that's new to the budget, and we haven't got over there yet, is we've added a facilities position, and we're gonna talk about that. That's in this operating budget. So anticipating the idea that we are going to be maintaining more of our buildings in this window, and there's some uncertainty, right? So but we need humans to do that, right? And so we can talk about it. We'll go back to the operating budget, so.
Mr.
Can I
Chair?
just follow on? It would allow us just to be also opportunistic. If we had the money set aside and a match was available in terms of window replacement or mini-split replacement or the kind of sensitive stuff, then we could be opportunistic when we take on projects because we'd have a reserve to show the match.
Well, I think that actually, that 210, or the 203 in the DPW capital outlay would actually give you some of that flexibility.
It does, but the other part is, we're gonna have a lot more direction in the next couple of years about what buildings we're maintaining, which ones we're replacing, right?
Hope so.
And that will help us determine really the life expectancies of each of these and what we're investing in and not. Because, part of the concern, and I get it, is, or the philosophy is, why would we put money towards that thing if we're going to be replacing it? But the reality is, those things take many years to replace, right? So they take many years to be operational, and so there's a lag time in there. And the question is, how do we determine how much and what? And that's where we get into it, right? Which is like, all right, well, if the library's 8 years, right, till it's built, then we're gonna replace this, and this, and, that's what you have to do. I mean, that's what happens when buildings don't get on a regular cycle of replacement, right, in a window. If you've frozen in time for 10 years, let's say, and you didn't do any of it, and now it's all due. So, and I think the good news is you have healthy free cash and reserves. So that's the good news, which is, and that's what they're for. So that's, you know, okay.
Mr. Chair, can I? I agree that I think, I'd love to see an internal analysis of our, I don't know, we have 6 key buildings, maybe 7 or 8, whatever you decide. And looking at the top things that, you know, the 5 things, roofs and plumbing and electric. I mean, it seems every year there's HVAC that needs to be replaced at these buildings. I mean, I thought we just did that in Town Hall. I don't know if we pushed it off, if we've changed it, but we see it again up here. So it would be, I think, nice to see if we hit the top 5 categories that we know are going to be the major expenses of maintaining these facilities. I don't think we need to do a whole feasibility study in respect, but I think internally we could easily do that based on the history of what's been done.
But
And the second point I just wanted to make, if I can, is it just confuses me. We're talking about setting aside more stabilization funds, but the philosophy of cutting back on other reserves. So we want to increase reserves in one thing, but reduce them in other. And that's fine with me if you want to kind of
Which, we just want to
specifically.
shift the funding source for the
Yeah.
reserve.
Okay, I'm just
Like
trying to understand the
taxation-
philosophy.
Taxation beyond, let's say, the creation of free cash or stabilization, which comes from free cash. The taxation is supposed to be about your annual operating expenditures for your town. They shouldn't be funding reserves, right, on a regular basis,
Right.
right? So that's the shift, which is you want to make it now while you are in a healthy place, right? Especially because you have nothing in these accounts. They're not operating in the way that they were intended when you set them up. And so you can continue funding them to whatever extent that you want from any of the available funding sources. It just based upon the thing you're funding, if it's one time, it should be basically one-time money. And that's the shift, which is, you know, a town shouldn't buy a roof in 1 year through taxation, right?
But it looks to me, I mean, I'm agreeing with you, but what I'm seeing is we're in a very healthy position right now with free cash, extremely healthy, in my opinion, at 5.5 or 5.5 million. That's not going to be the case if we're cutting back some of these stabilization funds and we need to use the money. We're not going to see that in the future, are we?
So I think you have them mixed.
Okay.
So free cash is one-time certified money that
Understand.
we strive to generate. Basically, free cash is whatever excess revenue, right? We talked about being conservative on revenue. So it's whatever comes in that's over that we budgeted for, and it's whatever we didn't spend on the expenditure side. We're aiming for 3 to 5% every year to generate, which we should do naturally because we are conservative in our revenue estimates, right? That money comes in and it's in the fall, right? It exists in the fall, you can spend it anywhere. Your current stabilization account is basically funded from previous years' free cash accounts.
Yes.
So you're up to $6.6 million in stabilization. That doesn't change at all based on any other changes to any of the other pieces here.
Okay.
The only potential change is when your operating budget goes up and your 12% figure goes higher, you need to transfer more free cash into stabilization.
Top it off.
Or if you spent it down, you'd need to replenish it at some point. It doesn't, the other ones, because they raise and appropriate, don't affect it. Because in theory, you're raising and appropriating it, you're transferring into a stabilization account, it's then being spent, it's sent out to another, let's just say, special article, for lack of a better, internal special article, and held there in perpetuity. Now, if it's not spent and they don't need it at the DPW for a project, it will roll into free cash, and then you'll get to decide again how you want to use it. So
So our free cash is at what % right now?
our free cash is not well, the policy is to strive to generate 3 to 5%, right? So we have $900,000 in free cash right now.
That's what's left. after
Yes.
we commit to
So,
this thing.
right,
How
so-
much do we have?
right, so-
5.5?
No, we have 900,000.
Well, okay, but before we committed to those things.
Right, so you certified 5.5.
Mm-hmm.
You're probably gonna not, a lot of this was one-time cleanup work,
That's
right?
okay. What
So-
percentage is that?
yeah.
Okay, so.
So we're looking for somewhere around, let's just say 2 million is our sweet spot. 2 million is about what we would be hoping for all the time, right? Like, that's the low end, right? But that's really what we're saying. If you don't see at least 2 million, I think I said this to the FinCom, if you don't see that, then something significantly has shifted in some way in a year, you know? And that could happen, right? You could have a COVID year, you could have a lack of tourism based upon current stance of Canadians. We could have a lot of different pieces that we talk about internally, right? Yeah, that could happen, right?
Okay.
So, but this money, like I said, none of this affects this money.
No.
So, like, just to, we can
I
go
just
through it a
wanted-
little bit.
To go back to the other sheet, if I just want to understand, if we just went back to the last sheet you had, the CI, the free cash. All those things we took out were all these purchases and placement of cardiac monitors, stuff like that. We might not have the flexibility to have a free cash at 5 million in the future.
Correct.
That's what I'm worried about, that if
And quite honestly, we shouldn't be striving to have 5 million.
we've got to still pay, these things will still come up,
Yes,
right? I
Yes.
Here we
mean,
go.
different things will come up.
yes.
We need
But-
to
Like
plan for it.
Right, so let's say, just to run through as an example, that we actually certified at 2.5 instead of 5.5.
Okay,
You're still gonna have to fund bills of a prior year.
yeah, well, yeah, that's.
Then the rest of it becomes a little bit more of a conversation, right?
Yeah.
So it's more, okay, well, we've got 2.5, what, 2.5 in free cash, and then we've got, let's say, $1 million excess in stabilization. So you got 3.5. What do we want to move forward? And it's not going to be everything every time, and that's the
point I'm
part.
trying to
That's
get to.
Right, it's not, and it honestly, it shouldn't be. Like, that's part of the budget process, which is, we absolutely want to fund and maintain service levels. Like, you start there. The rest is the stuff that we have to have conversations about, right? So like, and you will, you're gonna have to have them, and if the economy changes a bit in the next couple of years, you're gonna be having them anyway. So I think, but just to give an example, which is, we want this number to be lower. It's great because we love it, it's so high, can use it, but the reality is, it sends a red flag to the DLS that something is wrong in terms of we're either under calculating revenues or like, we're doing some of our pre-budget math wrong, essentially, that we generated so much. So when there is like a cleanup work that gets done, like when Jen went in and started going through everything and closing stuff out, they understand that, like, this is one time. This is why it's a spike. They don't want to see it every year.
Right.
Which is the other part.
That's the point I'm trying to get to, and that we're cognizant that next year, we will have less things to be able, less money to be
Yeah,
able to.
you're gonna have it right now, because funding, building and facilities in this way, or these other projects, means that you only have 310 left before we've even started talking about the articles.
Because it's encumbered.
And that's a real number. This is typical in a community. This amount of money is usually what's happening, which is, what are you funding here, right? So,
Yes, can I ask you for another question? What do you think is the right, projects are gonna come and value differently, but what do you think the right amount is to spend on the first whack in May? And then to hold on to before knowing you're gonna have to certify your free cash in November timeframe or whatever. You know, like, where should we be thinking? If you're saying ideally, we should be at 2.5 million next year, or how much of that should we allot to spending in May? Approximately.
I'd like to see $1 million roll to May,
A
right?
million in May, and then $1.5 million
But
is held for,
So, no, so $1 million $1.5 million you spend when it comes in, and $1 million rolls to May, essentially.
rolls to November. Am I understanding?
Well, no, because it's fall then May, right, in our timeline.
Right, okay,
So,
so
so, to me, but you don't know based on the projects. So like, you had a very healthy year, so like,
Because of interest.
interest is part of it, closing out accounts is part of it, some of this is money that you won't see again. Something like Tonsit, right?
Doesn't happen every year.
Right? And it's usually in another community that might not have as healthy reserves, is something that you think about paying out of stabilization. It's a big purchase that's unusual, but one time, it's a big one, right? It's a community investment, right? It's larger than the other pieces. Even like recreation, like this number could have been less, because in theory, the CPC funding that's designated every year should have picked up this, but because that also has been sort of sideways, so like, if you were aligned in a different, if you were operating, this is 3 million right here, that you would have had available for sort of other pieces, one-time things, right? And that's sort of where we're trying to get to. But typically, the tricky part is, you don't want to base your budget on the hope of free cash, which is the tricky part around equipment, because then every time it becomes like a cash grab, right? Like, who's getting what funded and when, which is why you need a plan, right? And we did a $2 million catch-up, right, already in equipment, so like, as long as, once we have a better schedule in place about replacement, we'll be able to plan for it better. And then the worst-case scenario, like I said, is free cash doesn't get certified, so then we decide, does this bump to May, or do we take it as stabilization and replenish? That's sort of the buying stuff, typical schedule.
Can you explain why free cash wouldn't get certified?
So sometimes the DLS is so backed up, because like I said, every 351 submitted at the same exact time, and they only have so many people in there doing them all. So they really strive to get them done, but we are basically beholden to their,
And has that happened to us before? Does
I don't-
anybody remember that our free cash was not certified?
We've been good.
yeah.
We've been, okay.
I know the school's E&D was just a year.
And I'll add that this year was, I guess, kind of what I would perceive as like a worst-case scenario kind of situation, and we still made it in time.
Okay.
So it was hard, but we got it done.
And what does making it in time mean? I'm sorry, I'm not understanding.
There's a lot of DLS reporting that is required
That
in
we've gotta
advance
give
that
to
they
them.
then analyze in order to create a certification of free cash.
Okay, right.
So all that reporting, so once the fiscal year end ends,
Water.
there's a whole lot of calculation going into, figuring out that we have proper data in the proper places in order to create reporting for the DLS. And then the DLS analyzes that from their angle, and they added requirements last year as well. So like I had to have the CP2 in prior to certifying free cash. So they raised the requirements.
And how do you feel about this year?
I mean, I certainly am still challenged. But I think, like I said, I think last year was worse.
But, Mr. Chair, the in time, Michael, if I can, is in time for our assumptions, which we made, printed in the warrant for fall town meeting. And, you can see the date, 10/9/24, we got certified. And,
10/13 was the meeting, right?
no,
No.
no, it was 10/29, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you read the paper today, I mean, Wellfleet is still waiting for their free cash
That's
certificate.
correct.
We shouldn't laugh.
So
Well,
Bad karma.
some towns are not as,
I think
that's why I was asking, have
That's
we
a
ever
good
been in a
point.
situation, we're a very good AAA, we've been on top of it, it's,
It does happen.
Yeah.
It's not really an
Anything can happen,
indicator
but-
of, I mean, flukes happen.
Yeah,
right? They
flukes
aim,
will
Could
happen.
be on our side, could be on their side. You plan for it. I've been in experience, like, where we've been sweating it up to the day in some places. That's pretty typical, because the DLS is, we operate at their schedule. right? So, all right, we gotta go back to the budget, because we're running out of time. So I'm gonna talk about the budget that we are gonna bring forward tomorrow. I promised to have it be as real-time as possible before we got into this hearing tomorrow, because I want to make sure that the numbers that we are sending out into the public are as close to what I believe at this moment in time we can verify are true. So for simplicity's sake, what you can see now, which is a slight difference from before, is that the retirement benefits number has remained the same, and the reserve for negotiations number has now come down to 680, which was what I was hoping, and we'll talk a little bit about why. I'm gonna go to some of your,
Mr. Chair, can I jump in? Just one quick, Kim, on the 875,
yep.
if somebody were to ask, how do I find how that number's built? Where is the backup to that?
So this one is really easy. If you look in the operating budget, and you go to the lines for retirement and for benefits, all the way down at the bottom of the budget, show you, you can see what they are. We got, the retirement increase, which is dictated to us by the county, right, was 14%. And then our health insurance increase, is 6.5%, but there's some nuance in there because of types of coverages for types of employees, right? So.
If you grab the dollar change from each of the line items, that's.
Exactly, but remember that OES also is part of our retirement and benefit numbers.
Okay.
So if you were to take, and I just go down to the bottom, it's at the very bottom of the budget if you're looking, employee health and Medicare, there's a line here for employee benefits, right?
Yep.
You can see there's 300 and, I can't see, I'm gonna make it bigger.
388.
Yep, 388, make it bigger. Here, you have to take this number, this 388, you have to take the retirement number that's also dictated to us, which is right here,
Okay,
and then you have to go to OES, because they have employees too, and they have a
Right.
share of it, and add those four numbers together. And that's how
35.
you get that number.
35,986.
Yes.
Got it, thank
It
you.
is directly the increase in those four lines. Okay?
And again, the message on that, Mr. Chair, is beyond our control.
Right, which is
We
right.
just get told,
Which is right here, so you can see, it's a lot. I mean, so,
It is.
here's the health insurance, 6.5 for them, because we don't know about design coverage changes really, in
Retirement's
real time for them, and then, right, based on percentage of numbers that we got, and the types of employees in different groups.
do you know, I mean, 16%,
We got
Is that-
14.
is that because actuarial, or do we know what caused the county to say we've got I just,
So, yes, we're getting the actual detailed number, but the reality of the situation is based on the addition of 8 FTEs 2 budgets ago, right? So like when you increase your overall employee count, you increase the amount of responsibility for retirement and projection into the future, and the number of actual retirements at any given time. So,
thank you.
I even got a higher number, so I don't, is that,
what?
I must have added it wrong, but from the retirement, I get a higher number than
No, it should be.
75?
It's the difference of all of the increases.
difference. of all-
The roll-up of all,
Increase,
Yeah,
yeah.
grab all the increases,
right.
Right,
and it should total the 875.
Yeah.
okay.
Okay,
That's all that's in that
Added
number.
wrong.
So,
thank you.
next, so we just talked about facilities, so I'm just gonna go, we've made some small changes in the budgets, and I'm not gonna go line by line unless you have any specific requests. We are currently still negotiating with all of our employees, basically all of them. We are getting close to hopefully having some agreements in place. As we are getting closer on those numbers in real time, I am adjusting the numbers in salary lines here and there and the reserve number that we need. Right now, I am at 961 in this line, right? Just as a reminder, because we are using that override number for that one as the balance, right? Basically, what in excess do we need to balance the budget, right? Because we are going through, just like we did with the ambulance revenue, to try to find ways to offset the total impact of this contract negotiation number. So we've been able to bring it down a couple $100,000 in the last couple of weeks based upon real-time sort of working. We started at 1.1 in that reserve line in the budget. We're down in the 9s, which is great. I actually think we could get a little lower even before, whoops, sorry, what?
Just so you see what it,
So, right now, the budget as it stands, with some small adjustments, these are the two override numbers. But since the last time we met, there has been one addition to the operating budget. I just want to make sure, because we did not talk about it in a real-time meeting. And this came out of the meeting that we had with the district that night, and we'll talk about the district's budget in a minute, about the facility needs related to OES and sort of commitment to overall facilities. And so we had already added one parks position to maintain the grounds in the town. We have added another facilities position in the DPW. So that's 2 positions now, rather than 1. The value of adding a position like that is about $100,000. We certainly can debate it, right, if you want, since it's a post ad, right?
That's a shared, though?
So the idea is, the idea is that there is enough work between all of these facilities that we absolutely should be committing to having boots on the ground to share, right? I didn't put it in the OES budget because quite frankly, we don't have the breakdown in our budget of their budget, right? So, but it would be a position in the DPW related to maintaining facilities. So there's 2 in there right now. So if something, we had to go back, went south, or we would talk about it again. But we have added it, we are recommending that it be funded. It certainly, I think, shows our commitment to maintaining our facilities, since we will have a number of buildings that need care.
And, Mr. Chair, and this came up just so folks know where we're coming from. We had I call it a budget primer, at all the members of the regional school district met at the auditorium. We had lunch and we had some breakouts. In our breakout in Orleans, the question was asked by somebody, do we know what our resource that contributes to the facility spends in terms of, are there work tickets, and there's none of that. So I just, not for the budget, but I'm looking at Rich in the crowd too. I mean, we really should, Kim, start to know.
We are talking about
Who
a
is working
slip
where?
system. We are
Yeah.
working on that,
Thank you.
right? We have to transition to a more traditional model of maintenance and DPW work.
And it's not to bash any staff who
No.
are just,
It-
phone rings, they're there.
Yeah.
But I think you need to just know, is it 50% of the time? Is it 10%,
So, the other change, since we're on education, is about the district. So, there's a little wrinkle here, and we're staying positive. So, right now, this calculation that's here, we do not have a breakdown individually for each town. What we have is the general district budget number that was adopted and then divided by our percentage, and that is this 6.75, essentially. What's interesting is, I'm just gonna put this one down here, their budget is not finalized. There are a number of outstanding issues that the towns are bringing up with them right now. I would expect these numbers to change or some additional clarification. Let's just put that there. For me, one of the strange things, I'm just gonna say, last year, some of you may recall, when we had our regional assessment meeting, we were directed in that meeting that we had essentially double counted this number, and it was in the assessment. So I made sure to make a note that it was in the assessment. When I was doing the calculation for this year, it seems like it's not actually in the assessment, which is the direction we were gave. So I did send this to Gio. Gio is out on leave. I did send it to Jim Novak and said, I would like some clarification, because last year, the direction that you gave us in the meeting was that this number was double counted because it was already in the assessment number. When I do the math, it doesn't appear to be in the assessment number. So rather than be short on our budget, I have budgeted the number that I think is our share of the capital budget for the district in this line. I have sent it to them to confirm that it's not double counted, and Jim has said that it is not double counted. So what that means, though, in real time to us is, this is a $135,000 increase now that we didn't have budgeted last year because we were told it was in the assessment. What I would say at this moment in time is, because we haven't seen the school's budget presentation yet, and they haven't finalized their budget, all that we can do is do our own calculation as we're heading into the budget hearing, which is really strange. But that's what we're doing based on timeline. And so I'm not gonna be too worried about this right now, because it's gonna evolve over the next couple of weeks, and there's not much we can do about it in real time in this moment. But just these numbers are updated off of the numbers we were given. But just so you know, this is a big swing. Which I think is correct, which I thought was correct last year. But if someone tells me it's already in their number, that would be great, and then we'd have a swing back of 135. So I will wait for that. But that's one of the changes too since last time. So we really don't have anything else outstanding, like I said, we are going through, you're gonna see changes in salary lines as I'm trying to get these numbers down, right, real-time numbers. We're going to roll into tomorrow with this version of the budget, which we'll put online and we will, make available and have this one for the hearing. But the caveats are, there are still some pieces that are outstanding. That's unusual in terms of, normally you're doing your budget hearing before your town meeting because it's the budget that you're bringing to town meeting. We are, by charter, having ours now, so.
Can I ask, Kim, do you think there's a chance, like, for our joint meeting tomorrow to have an answer on that? I mean, that can move things.
No, I got the answer from Jim, and he said wasn't double counted, so like that number is good. I'm going with that. But there are some other issues with their budget they still have to determine. One of them is about their current use of E&D, which we have to talk about. We don't have their finalized numbers. They're still in their early version. So like I said, not much we can do about it right now, so. and-
Can I have a question just in regard to that? So that $135,000 that we thought was included in the assessment last year, but
No, we were told, and I
You were
got, I
told that-
removed it in the meeting,
Right.
in real time, when they were here. They told me,
Right.
so I took it out and
Took it
wrote.
out. So there's $135,000 from the town of Orleans that did not get paid to the region.
Well, no, they got their 644,516, whatever their calculation is.
They got that amount, and they were telling us that there was, in that amount, was $135,000.
And we also did get, this is the other part.
So, well, my question, so if it wasn't really there,
Did they
what
really?
didn't get taken care of?
So that's the question, which is, we got a list of their capital project spend for this year. Oh, sorry, I beat you.
Well, I want to tell you, because I had an email exchange with Gio last year about this, right?
Yep.
He had it in the budget under that 131,003 line. It was $127,066.
Yeah,
She said it was overcounted, it needed to be zeroed out. It was part of the assessment. We actually zeroed that number through the motion at town meeting.
Okay.
So it was a very active conversation about that, and she was adamant that that number shouldn't be there because it's in the assessment.
so,
That doesn't answer your question.
So my question is, if it was in fact not in the assessment,
we got the actual year-to-date capital expenditure use for the district about a week ago, and they've only spent 130,000 total from their total of 700,000 or something. So they actually haven't needed it is the other part, right? So like that's how they could potentially, if this was an error, which we're not sure on, again, I'm just, we'll figure that part out, right? If I take their math and I do the calculations and I back into the math, I see that we need to budget this 135, put it that way. They tell us we don't need to, great,
Well, is it-
right? But that's also, like I said, that's where I'm at. Our share, we know what the total, we know what the capital cost is, we know what our share percentage is. That should be pretty straightforward, and just saying, so.
if I were a suspicious person, having worked in the district for almost 50 years,
No,
would I think that perhaps out of that 700,000, they've only spent 100 and something because, we can take the other 500 and something and stick it in E&D and then use it for this
So-
year's?
we need to have a longer conversation about E&D, but it's not today, okay? And we should we should give them the benefit of presenting their own budget materials first, which they have worked on. And they certainly can, answer questions related to their own budget. I will say their use of E&D for this next year is right now at $1.75 million, which I actually think is over the amount that they have eligible to use. So I think there's a further conversation about that has to happen still. So, but you can be sure that Brewster and Eastham and Orleans are on it again. So, anyway, good time to decide whether or not you want to add the article back on about separating out the budgets. But I would say, let's let them do their own budget explanation. All I am pointing out to you is,
We're holding.
I'm putting it back in, because I
Cautious,
did,
cautious.
and I would like to be wrong. That would be great, to the tune of $135,000. But right at this moment,
Yeah.
I'm leaving it in there. So just, that could change in real time. Their number could go up, too. That's the other part. We don't know, so. I don't think, unless anybody has anything specific they want to ask or talk about, I don't think there's any other key changes in here from the other budgets. So we can take questions.
Mr. Chair?
Kevin?
I think you hit them all, Kim, in terms of my questions. The big one I brought were all the school questions, but like you said, we got to wait. The only other thing is, tomorrow, will we have some visibility on the article request?
Yes,
Okay, that's tomorrow.
it's on the agenda. Can't wait to get to town meeting. Budget will be over.
We have 40 total. That includes like a lot of the regular stuff.
That's pretty miraculous, actually.
I feel like there's not many.
Right. We
Okay.
are laser focused, like I said.
On
Fire
the-
station, short-term rentals,
Yeah.
laser focused.
Mr. Chair, can I?
Yes.
On the operating, did you, I know, and I don't know if you had a chance yet, but are we able to see the percentages this year versus last year for the personnel and the capital and the operating?
Yep, it's on this tab right here. Hold on.
May have missed it.
And over, let's shrink it so it's easier to see. So this is just my check over here to make sure my math is right. My math is mathing. To the other pages. So you can see here, here they are. So the total budget, the personnel, then their operating, and then capital. Then last year's 25 budget, the percent change by individual one, and then the dollar amount change. This is helpful to see, like, so people can understand where the money really goes, right? And where the big swings are.
I guess I didn't ask it correctly. Can we see the personnel operating capital this year versus last year by change in percentage? That's what I had asked.
For each department?
No, well, just for by category on the total.
So that would be, what, oh, you mean like it should be total down here?
Yeah,
So right here, I mean, the total combined, right, is like about 4%. So this, right, so we could do them, well, so here's for the town, right? So this year we moved the schools down. So on the towns, right?
not worried about the schools.
So you can sort of get a sense, so,
Like the 17.8 for personnel, what is that versus 25?
Oh, okay.
What's the percentage change? What's the percentage change in the operating versus 25?
so,
Capital isn't flowing down, also I had mentioned that.
yeah.
I-
With that, because if that particular one, that 95 gets paid with the water fund. But, yep,
That would just be helpful, because I guess my one question, I have received it a couple times from people, is the debt service that's really skewing this year. I mean, if you look at it, it's at 3.6, as you say, but mostly we're looking at an average change of about 10%. It's the debt service that's really helping us out by this significant reduction. Am I misunderstanding this?
yeah, because the, other
Oh, you
location
got 7, okay.
that you can see that is over here.
But if you go back to the operating budget, the debt service, I think it's down 1.5 million. which is significant, 20%. Is that?
Well,
gonna
it's not
continue?
down,
Oh, okay.
it's moved.
Okay, I'm not seeing
To
that.
sewer.
So the
Sewer
debt for the enterprise funds moved to the enterprise funds.
Oh, so that 20% that it's taking, it's not that we're reducing it, that.
It's moving, right? It's moving it out of the operating
It's
budget.
making us look like, it's affecting the 3.6 at the bottom, correct? Or not?
Yes, well, it would. I mean, this is the total from last, for the town's operating portion.
It makes us look like we're at 3.6, which
Right,
is.
but if you go to the front page, so this is town operating budget, right? Go to this page, you can see by year over year what the differences are in different places, right? So this, now, Lynn asked about this yesterday, and I just want people to understand. This FY '25 number is not gonna match the FY '25 number that's in the previous year's budget, because when you appropriate funds at a fall town meeting, like we did for the housing, it gets put into expense lines in the budget, basically gets distributed, gets captured and then distributed. So these numbers will change, and they won't necessarily exactly match either, because you don't capture it all. So there are slight changes there, but you can get a sense of where the bigger changes are. They're definitely in the enterprise funds. I mean, that's a fact. Like, we've done a lot of work in the enterprise funds, significant.
So, Mr. Chair, can I, on the enterprise funds, is this a tomorrow discussion when we get into enterprise funds on fees?
So we are going to follow up on fees. We're not presenting anything related to fee changes here.
Okay.
To me, it's more of a town meeting sort of conversation. We're starting to meet tomorrow to talk about
Is that-
what, if anything, we're going to be recommending for fall, for the May town meeting. And if there are changes related to that, then we'll make an adjustment to the budget, right? But right now, we're assuming everything is status.
I would just recommend, as you sit with staff, I'm looking at Rich as well, water needs an increase. They really do. I mean, we're in drought. The urgency to reduce water use only hurts revenue. There's only one way to fix that. It's a rate increase.
Have we gotten any more updates on that? Drought?
It's still intact. Don't think it's gonna get better.
Don't we have an annual water department meeting where they propose rates?
Yes.
When does
Just
that-
talking
when
about
does
that this morning. We were just talking about it.
When does that happen?
Would happen before May,
Mhm.
is when it would happen.
Yeah.
Based on their annual, basically adopting their annual structure.
Just as a question, and Rich might be able to answer this. Because we are trying to do some of the water main replacements and repairs in conjunction with sewer work, has that accelerated the need to tap into the reserves for the water department?
Yeah.
So that, again, suggesting we may need to have that discussion about rate increases, because what Kevin's alluding to is that when you tell people you use less water, and they use less water, you make less money.
Right.
But you still have to maintain the system.
So you can see in the water CIP, just pull it up, right, we do have, this is all funded with water reserves essentially, right? Everything that's in here that's projected to be done is funded with water.
Other questions from the board? Audience? Online? Tony, got anything for us?
No, thank you. Congratulations, Kim. I think that's great.
Yeah,
We'll see. Right?
so it really is great work.
We have a lot of areas still left, like we said, like the enterprise funds, the fees, definitely figuring out how to budget for facility maintenance in interim periods, while we're thinking about debt schedules, right? That's, slow and steady, but I think we're making some progress in some of the pockets that like were problematic last year. So far, so good.
Okay. Thank you, Kim, Mark.
Anything else? No.
all your efforts.
Happy to help.
Staff. Jen,
Thank you.
it's nice to see you again. You haven't been here for a while.
Thanks.
Anything else from the board? No? I can entertain a motion.
We adjourn.
Second?
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.